To most people, Pretty Little Baby was just another sweet love song from Connie Francis. A soft melody, a catchy hook, nothing more. But those closest to her knew better, because behind that gentle tune was a name she never said aloud. A man she lost too soon, and a heartbreak she never truly got over. She never confirmed who the song was written for. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. The timing, the expression in her voice when she sang it live, fans started to put the pieces together. And one name kept coming up: Bobby Darin. Their young romance was real, intense, but short-lived. Not because they fell out of love, but because Connie's father ended it. He didn't approve of Bobby, and when he threatened him to walk away, Bobby did. Quietly, painfully. And Connie? She kept singing. Decades later, when asked about that time in her life, she smiled. But her voice trembled when she mentioned his name. And then, in a quiet moment near the end of her career, she let it slip. That the song was personal. That it had always been. She never told Bobby what it meant. He died never knowing. And now, for fans who've listened to Pretty Little Baby for over 60 years, the meaning hits harder than ever. Because it wasn't just a love song. It was her goodbye. When Connie Francis met Bobby Darin in the late 1950s, something unexpected happened. For all her poise and professionalism, she found herself falling hard. Bobby wasn't just charming. He was brilliant, ambitious, funny. He made her laugh in ways no one else could. He challenged her. He brought her out of her carefully protected shell. To Connie, he wasn't just another boy in the music business. He was the one. They were both teenagers at the time, rising stars whose paths crossed during recording sessions and industry events. But their connection wasn't about fame. It was quiet, sweet, personal, and it bloomed in the shadows, away from flashing bulbs and public scrutiny. But Connie's father, George Francanero, saw it differently. He was more than just her father. He was her manager, her protector, and in many ways, her gatekeeper. George had built Connie's career from the ground up, and he wasn't about to let anything or anyone interfere, especially not a young, fast-talking Bobby Darin, who didn't fit his vision of what a proper suitor for his daughter should look like. And so, without warning, George made his move. He allegedly threatened Bobby, told him to back off, leave Connie alone, or face consequences that could destroy his career. Bobby, still trying to get a foothold in the music industry, made the impossible choice. He walked away. No goodbye, no explanation, just distance. Connie was devastated. She didn't know the full story until much later, when the damage had already been done. All she knew was that the boy who had made her heart race, who had made her believe in something deeper, was suddenly gone. And she wasn't allowed to ask why. She obeyed her father. She kept working. She smiled in public. But something inside her cracked. And yet, she sang. She poured her heart into love songs, torch ballads, and wistful melodies. Some were written for her. Some she chose herself. But over time, her fans began to notice that certain songs carried a different weight. A subtle ache, a tremble in her voice that wasn't just performance. One of those songs was Pretty Little Baby. Came out in 1961, just a few years after Bobby had walked away. The lyrics, about waiting, pleading, and holding on, felt like they came from someone who had lived every word. And many fans, even then, quietly suspected the song was more than just a catchy tune. It felt personal. Of course, Connie never confirmed it. Not publicly. She was too careful, too loyal to her past, and perhaps too wounded to bring it all back. But decades later, in interviews and personal reflections, she started to hint. She talked about Bobby again, about how her father had robbed her of something real, about how she never quite forgave him for that, and about how, in her heart, there was a chapter left unfinished. By then, it was too late. Bobby had passed in 1973, just 37 years old. There was no reunion, no second chance, no final conversation, but there was still the music. And for Connie, Pretty Little Baby became more than just a hit single. It became a time capsule, a quiet confession, a reminder of the boy she couldn't keep, and the words she never got to say. And for fans listening now, knowing what they do, it's almost unbearable. Because once you suspect that the song was meant for him, you can't unhear it. By the time Pretty Little Baby was released in 1961, Connie Francis had already become a household name. Her voice was everywhere, on radios, in jukeboxes, on television. But this song was different. It didn't sparkle the way some of her chart toppers did. It didn't shout. It whispered. And if you listened closely, really listened, you could hear something behind the melody. A tenderness that wasn't rehearsed. A longing that didn't come from the lyric sheet alone. For most fans, it was simply a beautiful ballad. A soft, romantic plea to a lover who had left, asking him to come back. But for those who knew what had happened behind the scenes, for those who had heard the rumors about her and Bobby Darin, the song took on a deeper meaning. Because Pretty Little Baby wasn't just about a boy. It was about the boy. The one who walked away without explanation. The one she hadn't stopped thinking about. The one her father had taken from her. And this time, she wasn't asking for permission. She was singing through the silence. The lyrics tell the story. Pretty little baby, come on back to me. I'll make you happy, just wait and see. I love you so much I can't let you go. They aren't just lyrics, they're a confession. But Connie never said his name. She never told the public who it was about. She didn't have to, because for her, singing was safer than speaking. The studio was her sanctuary. And Pretty Little Baby became the only way she could reach out to someone who was no longer there. There was no stage performance with dramatic tears, no tabloid exposé, just the song recorded, released, and left to float through time like a message in a bottle. And in the years that followed, something strange happened. Connie kept returning to that song. She performed it often, even when her set lists changed. She never cut it, never forgot it. And those close to her say she sang it differently every time. Slower, softer, like she was remembering something or someone. In later interviews, she began to hint at what she'd buried. She spoke about missed chances, about a relationship she never got closure from, about how some songs stay with you because you never got to live them the way you wanted. She didn't say Bobby's name, but the emotion said everything else. And for fans who had been listening for decades, those who remembered the early days, the rumors, the broken engagement that never was, the connection became clear. Pretty Little Baby was more than a single. It was a doorway into her past. A quiet cry for someone who couldn't hear it anymore. Even her tone in those final years changed when she spoke about the song. She called it bittersweet, said it was one of the few that still made her feel something every time. That's what made it so powerful. Because it wasn't just a radio hit or a relic from a golden era. It was a story left unfinished. A feeling she never unpacked. A goodbye she never got to say out loud. And now, after all these years, fans are hearing the song in a new way. Not as a pop tune from a simpler time, but as a hidden love letter. One that Bobby Darin never opened. One that Connie Francis sang quietly, again and again, hoping maybe, somehow he'd hear it. Even now, when fans press play, some say it feels like Connie is singing it to him still. There's a kind of pain that doesn't make headlines. The kind that doesn't erupt in public, but settles quietly in the background, growing heavier with time. That was the kind of pain Connie Francis carried after Bobby Darin walked out of her life. She didn't cry on stage. She didn't speak to the press. She didn't fight to get him back. She stayed silent. And in doing so, she did what so many women of her generation were taught to do. Keep smiling, keep working, and don't let your personal life interfere with your success. But inside, something broke, and she never fully let it heal. Years later, she would admit that her father's interference cost her more than just a romance. It cost her her voice, in a way. Not the sound of it, but the freedom to express what mattered most. The freedom to choose who she loved, and how she would live. That silence, imposed at first by her father, then internalized by Connie herself, became the invisible wall that divided the life she was living from the one she wanted. And Bobby, he never knew. He went on to marry Sandra Dee. He had a successful career of his own. But many close to him said he never forgot Connie, that there was always something unresolved between them. a what if that lingered in the background. The two never had a public reconciliation. No on-stage duet, no grand reunion. Just distance, just time, just the unspoken. And that, in the end, may have been the most tragic part of all. Because both of them were young when it happened. Too young to fight back against expectations, contracts, parents, managers. Too early in their careers to risk scandal. And so, instead of a love story, they became a question mark. An unfinished sentence in the history of American music. Connie buried herself in work. She became one of the best-selling female vocalists of all time. Her voice became the soundtrack to millions of lives. But in her personal life, nothing ever quite filled the space Bobby left behind. She had other relationships. She married 4 times. But friends say she never really found peace. She struggled with depression, with trauma, with loss. And though she rarely spoke about it, she always seemed to carry that quiet sadness. The kind that comes not from one big tragedy, but from years of holding everything in. It wasn't until much later, decades after Bobby's death, that she began to open up about what really happened. She never framed it as a big reveal. She simply started letting pieces slip through. How she felt robbed. How her father's control took things she could never get back. How she had loved someone and wasn't allowed to keep him. She didn't need to name him. The world already knew. And as those words finally came out, softly, in interviews, in memoirs, in passing comments, fans began to see Pretty Little Baby not as a song of teenage longing, but as something far more tragic. It wasn't about a crush. It was about a goodbye that was never said. A love that was silenced before it even had the chance to become real. And in that silence, kept for decades, buried beneath fame and applause, was the echo of something irreplaceable. Because Connie didn't just lose Bobby. She lost the chance to tell him how much he meant. She lost the moment where she could have said, "It was always you," and that stayed with her, even after all the hits, even after the applause died down. Even when Connie Francis didn't say it out loud, her fans felt it. There was something different about Pretty Little Baby. Something in the way she sang it. How her voice softened on certain lines. How her eyes would drift upward like she was remembering someone. It didn't sound like just another love song. It sounded like a memory. And over the years, as Connie continued performing it, on stages big and small, fans began to notice. They whispered among themselves, passed theories along, wrote letters posted on message boards decades later. It wasn't just a song. It was a story. And they were piecing it together, because her audience didn't forget Bobby Darin. They remembered the stories from the late 50s, the young love, the sudden breakup, the whispers about her father, the look in her eyes whenever Bobby's name came up in interviews. And they remembered what came after. They saw her smile on TV, her carefully curated image as America's sweetheart. But they also sensed something beneath it, a sadness that never quite left. And when she sang Pretty Little Baby, they felt like they were witnessing something private, like she was still singing to him. That's why, even decades later, fans still talk about it. They still play the song and wonder, was it really about Bobby? Did he ever hear it and suspect? Was it her way of reaching out when she couldn't speak? Connie never gave them a full answer, but she gave them just enough. A comment in a rare interview. A line in her memoir about how her greatest love story never got a second chapter. The way she said she felt robbed of something she never got back. To most, it was obvious who she meant. And that's when the song started to shift in meaning. Not just for Connie, but for everyone who had loved her music for generations. Pretty Little Baby stopped being a nostalgic tune from 1961. It became a symbol, a question, a what if. And for fans, especially those who had experienced their own version of lost love, it hit home. Because so many of them knew what it meant to wonder what could have been, to carry words unsaid, to feel time slipping away and realize that some people leave before we ever tell them what they meant. That's why, when the rumors started spreading that Connie had quietly admitted the song was deeply personal, when she began referencing the pain she had long kept hidden, it didn't come as a surprise. Felt like confirmation that they had been right all along. that they had seen the truth in her eyes and heard it in her voice, that the story they had sensed behind the song was real, even if it was never spoken in full. And it created something rare in the world of celebrity, a shared grief, not just for what happened to Connie, but for what didn't happen, for the conversation she never got to have, for the reunion that never came, for the man who never knew he had been her pretty little baby. That grief wasn't loud. It didn't show up in headlines, but it lived in the quiet moments, on fan forums, in handwritten letters sent to her over the years, in the comments under old performance videos online, and most of all, in the way people still listen to the song today. They don't just hear the melody, they hear the history, the loss, the love, the silence that said more than any lyric ever could. As the years passed, Connie Francis faded from the spotlight, but never from the hearts of her fans. Her voice, so pure, so unmistakable, had left its mark on a generation. But behind the fame, behind the hits, her later years were marked by quiet reflection. Less red carpets, fewer interviews, and more time spent looking back. She had lived a life that was both extraordinary and tragic. She'd endured a brutal assault that changed her forever. She'd battled through hospitalizations, depression, and the aftershocks of trauma that lingered long after the crowds stopped cheering. But even in that darkness, the memories of her early days, of that first innocent love, seemed to remain untouched, untarnished. And that's why, as Connie began speaking more candidly in recent years, fans leaned in a little closer. Her words had weight now. Every interview felt like a legacy being passed down. Scraps of truth, hard-won wisdom, and stories she had never dared to share before. That's when she said it. Not in a viral headline, not on stage, but softly, almost like she was talking to herself. She was reflecting on the songs that meant the most to her, the ones that still stirred something. When Pretty Little Baby came up, she paused. And then she said, almost under her breath, that one was never just a song. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. To those who had followed her story for decades, the message was clear. She had never forgotten Bobby. She had never let go of what they were, what they could have been. And that song had been the closest she ever came to telling him. It wasn't an angry revelation. There was no bitterness in her voice, just acceptance, a quiet kind of heartbreak that had softened with time, but never disappeared. She talked, too, about how often women of her era were silenced, how love was sometimes a luxury they weren't allowed to choose for themselves, and how music became her only form of rebellion, her only place to speak without being interrupted. That's what Pretty Little Baby was, a whispered confession, a way to say, I loved you without ever saying it out loud. In her final years, as health challenges mounted and public appearances became rare, Connie was often described as reflective. Friends said she revisited old letters, played her early records late into the night, spoke Bobby's name more often than she had in decades. She never regretted her career, but she regretted the silence. And it was in that silence that Pretty Little Baby remained, her secret message preserved in melody, her quiet goodbye to the boy who never got to hear it. Now, as fans revisit her music with new understanding, the emotion hits different. It's not just about chart success or golden oldies. It's about a woman who carried a love story in her heart for more than half a century, and finally let the truth peek through, one tender lyric at a time. She never said the words, but we hear them anyway, because when she sang that song, she wasn't just performing. She was remembering, and now that we know, we'll never hear it the same way again. Connie Francis never gave fans a dramatic reveal. She never stood on a stage and said, that song was for Bobby. But somehow, she didn't have to. Through every aching note of Pretty Little Baby, she left us a message. Not loud, not obvious, but quiet, gentle, honest. She carried the weight of what could have been for decades. And near the end of her life, she let the truth slip. Not with facts or timelines, but with feeling. With the soft kind of grief that never quite fades, no matter how many years pass. And for those who always believed there was more to the story, the pieces finally clicked into place. She loved him, she lost him, and through her music, she never let him go. Pretty Little Baby wasn't just a hit. It was her way of saying what she never had the chance to speak aloud. It was always him. And now, when fans play that song, when they close their eyes and let her voice wash over them, they don't just hear a melody. They hear a woman remembering the boy she couldn't keep. They hear the truth, tucked inside every word. For more emotional stories, check out this video.